I know what you did last week, do you? Dynamic Security Questions for Fallback Authentication on Smartphones by Josh Romley and Sunana Gandakji.
Basic information. This paper's authors were Alina Heng, Alexander DeLuca, and Heinrich Hussmann. They were from the Media Informatics Group of the University of Munich in Germany, and the goal of the experiment was to dynamically create unique questions for the owners of forgotten passwords on mobile devices. Prior work. Common fallback authentication solutions were often based on email or security questions. Users would create these questions upon making their account. The questions would typically relate to facts about a person's life, such as the name of their first pet. For example, let's say I make an email account. A question I might have chosen would be, who is my favorite person? Only 10 years after making my original account, the answer has changed, and I forgot who was my favorite at the time. Another common question category would be things related to family members. For example, what is your mother's maiden name? The answer to these types of questions are insecure as they can be easily looked up using websites such as Google. On another note, if a website emails you your password, oftentimes the sent email isn't encrypted and can be vulnerable to
Prior work. Babak et al. Created the idea for dynamic security questions, which was based on the user's recent internet activity. This required no account, and the information was constantly updated, preventing the issue of users forgetting their answers or the answers being out of date. This approach could not be applied with as much efficiency for mobile phones as it was for internet activity. Das et al.'s solution was an autobiographical approach based on different categories such as communication or what apps they had recently used. He also created a theoretical adversary model that allowed him to assess different types of adversaries that could potentially put the user at risk. For example, close adversaries such as spouses, or distant adversaries such as acquaintances, for example, classmates. Approach. The researchers who created this study analyzed different types of dynamic security questions so that they could determine what kinds of questions were secure and which were not. The questions were generated through an application the users downloaded onto their phones based on the data collected by a secondary application that logged the user's previous activity. Their goal was to create questions that were easy for the user to answer and hard for the adversaries, no matter how close they were to the user. They worked under a worst-case scenario, with the adversaries being close acquaintances of the target. Because they are close to the user, they are most likely to know the user's recent activity, or at the very least have a good guess about it.
Approach. First, the researchers brainstormed with several smartphone users to identify interesting information categories for the dynamic questions. The resulting categories were texting, both outgoing and incoming, phone call history, likewise both on the calling and receiving end, app history in regards to recent downloading, updating, and usage, music choice, and photographs. Each question was also coupled with a span of time: yesterday, last week, or last month. This, combined with the previous 7 categories, creates 21 possible options for dynamic questions. They then conducted a pre-study with 38 participants in order to evaluate these categories. 19 of the people were the smartphone users, and the other 19 were people that were considered close relationships to act as the offending adversary. In this pre-study, the users downloaded the logging app, and after 4 weeks were brought back into the lab along with their close relation. A second app would then create the 21 dynamic questions. For each question, the user was given 4 potential answers, and one of which was always going to be none of the above. Adversaries were asked to answer the same types of questions from the user's phone, and then after, the categories were judged based on how often the user correctly answered in comparison to their worst-case scenario adversary.
Results. During this pre-study, they were able to gather feedback from the participants about different categories. The participants were asked what types of questions they thought were more secure and which they felt should be removed. Users performed well when answering questions about who they texted and who texted them, as did their adversaries. In some cases, their adversary was the answer to the question. However, the adversaries did a poor job in answering questions about app usage, music, and pictures on the phone. They found that the best trade-off between security and usability were the questions regarding the apps. A big security concern the users had was the uses of photographs and the identities of people who they had contacted recently. This became an issue because these categories, for some people, used the information that the user wanted to protect in the first place. For example, if a jealous partner tried to use this fallback method, they could still see the information that the user may be trying to keep private, such as who they may be texting frequently. With the results and feedback from the pre-study, the researchers were able to construct a better selection of questions. For example, the category of photographs was completely eradicated and replaced with another category relating to the applications present on the device. The main study was conducted in the same manner as the pre-study with a few changes. The yesterday category was yielded with the best results. They found that the most secure combination of questions were: which app did you install yesterday? Who did you call yesterday? And who did you text yesterday?
Conclusions. They were able to successfully identify several categories that were suitable for creating security questions and several that were not. They are able to illustrate that it is very difficult to design this type of feature because it must take into account usability, security, and any privacy concerns the potential users may have. This experiment also brought up an ethical debate on which lines should or should not be crossed in regards to privacy versus security, thus suggesting that we should conduct more research into methods that preserve more privacy.
Our thoughts. This type of approach can cause a lot of security risks depending on how secretive the user may be. For example, what if the phone displays sensitive photos? We think that, although the privacy was a concern, the researchers could have considered it more when developing this method. The nature of the experiment focuses on the user's data and history, but not their privacy. The point of these fallback authorizations is to protect the user, so why put their data at risk? While this is a step in a positive direction, the inconvenience of email retrieve passcodes will probably remain the norm until further testing allows for more secure and private methods.
These are the references used by the researchers.